Today we got a really interesting presentation. I think my job is just to get out of the way as quickly as possible, just to introduce it, because I think it's a really good example of where lived experience can add value. And that's what we do in this section. We don't just say, oh, look, we're bringing in lived experience into the trust. We ask questions about what difference does it make? What does it add to our teams? And I think this is a really good example for us to consider. So I'm going to hand it to Jacqueline, who's going to introduce the wonderful work that Ellie's been doing.
Thank you, Neil. Hi, everyone. So just to contextualize the peer engagement facilitator project, I was thinking we've been lucky enough to get the PEF project money from HEE. And then I thought, not really lucky, we are competent enough to have got repeat funding for the last 3 years from Health Education England. We started off with a 50,000 bid, and now it's gone up to 70,000 for the last 2 years. And this is based on the competence and the success of the peer engagement facilitator project. So I'm really pleased to announce Ellie, who's going to be talking about her project Room to Grow, and she's a peer engagement facilitator in the perinatal mental health services. So here you go, Ellie.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me to come and talk about the project. Like Jacqueline said, I'm a peer engagement facilitator. So I work in the perinatal team, which is based here at Queen Mary's. And as part of my placement, I created a project. My placement's coming to an end this month. So this is quite a nice ending for my placement. I'm not sure who's in charge of slides, but if we could go to the next one. So under this little thing, you can see that I'm a PEF in Oxleas Community Perinatal Mental Health. I was a Oxleas perinatal service user when I had my daughter a few years ago. I also used Bromley, Lewisham and Greenwich Mind service as well. And I'm back under the care of the team. So I'm working with them, but I am a service user at the same time. I'm also an involved member on the Involved Register, and I've got some other sort of hats I wear in terms of my lived experience. Next slide, please. So the idea of this project came to me when I was visiting a mum under the care of the team with a nursery nurse. We spent a bit of time finding out how the service user was, and we talked a little bit about how much time was spent in one room. And it really got me thinking about, I've experienced that when I first had my daughter, and actually probably for months and almost up till now, we tend to spend quite a lot of time in one space. So this is my lounge, this is my image that I submitted to the project. And we find that we gravitate to that space a lot, and we did when she was really little. And the more I talked to other people about it, people agreed. When you're a parent, you have a newborn, it's easy to change, feed, play in that space. And you pop to the loo, you come back, go to the kitchen, you come back. I'm sure a lot of you who have kids will have experienced that. You can end up feeling like you spent all your time in there, which can be quite difficult. So it can be quite a comforting place, quite a safe space, but you can have mixed feelings about it. You can feel trapped. You can feel like it's difficult to get out of the house. And that's just when you're a parent of a newborn. If we switch to the next slide, you can see that actually, thanks, Neil. When you're experiencing perinatal mental health challenges on top of that, that is really, really tough, because actually the space around you can impact how you feel, or you can almost your feelings that you're experiencing as a parent during your perinatal challenges can kind of reflect on the space around you. So there's kind of a two-way street there with the space. It can be even more difficult to leave the house. So you maybe feel like with the anxiety and the low mood that actually you're spending even more time than you would normally at home. And I think there's lots of parallels between your mental health and your space, not just in perinatal, probably quite generally, but this is obviously what I focused on. So this idea then got me thinking about, I found that I spent a lot of time in this room, but also when I had bonding challenges with my daughter, she was looked after by other people in this room. I didn't really want to go in there. I resented her and the room. So that was a really difficult space for me to be in at the start. As she became older, I found it a lot easier. I felt a bit better. We now spend quite a lot of time in here, but it was just a really interesting journey for me. Next slide, please. So that's when I came up with a project idea of exploring our experiences with a space or place that has meaning to us during our perinatal and parenthood journeys. So we've got that double sort of layer of complexity there. So I thought it would be interesting if we invited our service users to capture an image of a space that has meaning to them. It doesn't have to be somewhere where they spend all their time. It could actually be people don't find that they spend loads of time in one space, but actually they go out to a space because it gives them some other feeling. Maybe they go to a room in someone else's home and that gives them some comfort and that really helps them in the moment. Then I invited people to write down reflections and thoughts. What does the space mean to you? How do you feel about it? Has it always been one positive or negative? Do you have mixed feelings? And then the sharing element. So sharing that element of our story to create that connection and solidarity for others, so that we're supporting others, we're giving other people hope, and we're showing people that they're not alone. Next slide, please. So that was the project idea. This is kind of how one of the project outputs. So this was this isn't the actual images, this is just the plan. Private one-day exhibition. So I invited all of the service users who took part to come to a private exhibition where we could really sit as a group and talk about what the experience was like, maybe what their spaces felt like to them, and they can talk about the differences between maybe their spaces. We could talk about the experience of the project. So that was just for project participants. And that was in this room on Monday. So we had a really lovely session with some of our service users. And it felt like a really positive experience, I think, for everyone. Next slide, please. So again, this is not the photos of the actual exhibition, but downstairs in the ground floor of this building, I've set up the public exhibition. So we've got 12 images and written pieces downstairs along the corridor between the main reception and the McGill room. And that's going to be on for 2 weeks. So it'll finish Tuesday, the 19th of March. And that's open to the public. As long as the building's open, the exhibition is there. Next slide, please. I've also created a photo booklet, which we are having printed at the moment. That is going to act as a resource, I guess, as a tool, as something that our service users can receive and use and read to help them maybe feel better. Maybe they can't get to the exhibition. Maybe they're really, really struggling in the depths of it. This is something we can take to their homes. We can email them, and that's something that maybe is going to be really useful to them. I have got a couple of copies, so I thought if you wanted to have a little look through, this is just a mock-up. So it is getting professionally printed, but that's just a mock-up for now. Next slide, please. So these are all the aims and benefits of the project. Next slide, please. I've just picked out a couple to talk about. So for me, for project participants, one of the main benefits I thought was about feeling a sense of empowerment and ownership from sharing their story. So I know from story sharing how draining it can be when you're talking about your symptoms, your diagnosis, how it felt. It's very personal, you're very vulnerable. But I felt like this project is a slight step away from being that vulnerable, because you're not talking about yourself and your feelings and your diagnosis. You're talking about the experience of your space. So I felt like that made it maybe that bit easier for service users to get on board. And then benefits for exhibition viewers and photo booklet readers. The main one for me is about reducing those feelings of isolation and to ensure people feel like they're not the only one. It's not just me that feels like I hate my space sometimes. It's not just me that struggles to get out of the house and I get fed up of not being able to. So those are kind of the two key benefits that I really feel are like one of the most important in the project. Next slide, please. Project evaluation. So I got some fantastic help since presenting at the IAG meeting in terms of what could evaluation look like. So this is still quite a new concept to me, but I wanted to I always plan to kind of evaluate the project, but I got some really good direction. So now we have some really key evaluation aims, which you can read here. But for me, I think understanding the impact of the project is the key one that I'm really focusing on. So if we go to the next slide, these are the kind of opportunities we have for evaluation. So we had our during the day of our private exhibition, we had a 1-hour session where everyone was invited to come and meet each other, have a coffee, have a chat, talk about their experience, and also an opportunity for me to ask some questions. So we had a bit of a listening sort of event at that as part of that catch up. We have a survey at the public exhibitions. There's a QR code downstairs where we hope to get lots of responses and lots of feedback. We're going to be sending out a survey to our project participants, and we also have put a survey in our photo booklets. So the photo booklets, we appreciate we probably won't get high levels of responses quite early on. It might be that we just, as when we distribute them, we might get some responses. Next slide, please. So where we're up to, so there's 12 of us who have taken part, including me. We've had some positive feedback already from the participants as part of our listening event, but generally just when I've spoken to them, so I spent quite a lot of time, because we're a community team, I spent quite a lot of time calling service users, building that relationship one-to-one, finding out if it was something they wanted to get involved with. And we had some really lovely feedback from those conversations of, actually, I think I could really see the value in this. So all of that kind of feedback has been really fantastic. We had the private exhibition, which was on Monday, and then the public exhibition, which started yesterday. These are the details of the public exhibition, but for your reference, it's downstairs every day. As long as the building's open, you can come and see it. Next slide, please. Am I good for time with them? Okay, just some reflections quickly. So challenges that I had was to do with sharing the project idea, achieving pure co-production, which I think is something that I definitely would want to work on more in the future. Reaching out to service users under the care of a community team. So with everyone being located in different spaces, it's quite hard to get everyone sort of together and communicating and to easily reach out to people. We had scenarios where we had service users who were discharged after a little period of time as well. So we had to work around that. And then we've looked at scalability and transferability. So how could we repeat this again in perinatal, or how could we spread it to other areas of the trust and other teams? So we're looking at that and how we can take it forward in the future. I think that could be the last slide. Could you see if there's another slide? No, I don't think there is. No, I think that's it. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Just a few questions, if there are any.
Ellie, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. It was really evocative to me in terms of experiences that I've had with newborns, and that sense of cabin fever that you can definitely experience. But I think what was really quite profound for me, I'd never really thought about before, but you're absolutely right. Your relationship with your environment is very much a mirror to how you're feeling generally about really love pack those emotions that we feel in a way that doesn't feel quite as bearing of the soul as talking about exactly what you're going through. So I think it's a really accessible angle. So thank you. I found it really thoughtful.
Thank you.
I like the idea of sharing it more widely with the trust, but I feel as though it is so valuable in a perinatal context. I feel that it would be great to share it amongst perinatal services more widely because it's so easy to do. It's such a nice way in to a conversation about people's experiences. I really applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have actually. Do you mean sort of perinatal services and like other? So I have actually reached out to kind of surrounding perinatal services to let them know that the exhibition, to say that we can, because we have consent to distribute the booklet in a digital format to service users and other perinatal services. So I'm really hoping that they appreciate that and they come back and they say, yeah, please send it to us. Fingers crossed we get some response from them. Thank you.
Just Ian. Hi, Ellie. I thought it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, and really interesting project. And I had similar thoughts to Rachel, really. I think it absolutely has wider application. And I'd be really interested in how we kind of spread it across services. My question was about the pandemic, actually, and whether the kind of people's experience of the pandemic had come through at all in the project. I know it's a couple of years ago, but in some ways it's actually only yesterday, it feels like. But it really, that seems to have quite a disruptive effect on
people's relationship with their environment, both in where they live, but externally. And I just wondered if anybody, and if that had come through at all in the project.
Yeah, I think we had one service user who did talk about a previous child that they had and talked about that experience briefly. But I think because with perinatal, our service users, they aren't actually with us for that long, I guess, compared to maybe some of the other mental health teams. So no, we didn't have a lot of reference to COVID, apart from maybe one or two people talking about previous births. But it was interesting to notice their reflections and their comparisons between that experience of the child they had the first time and COVID and this time. But yeah, it was just a light touch, I'd say. Yeah, thank you.
I really want to thank you because I think it's an amazing piece of work, and we've sort of come to time. But do you want to just take one more question? Okay.
Thank you. As an ex-midwife, I found that extremely interesting, and obviously, I think echoing what other people have said. I'd like to think the current staff in Queen Mary's who are doing antenatal clinics and postnatal clinics here will come and see the exhibition, and I will pass the word out among all my colleagues, and because I think what you've done is very valuable, and that will bear repeating in other areas, because I know for a fact that women suffer silently, and I think that's so important that both the women and their partners get to understand the impact on them and their families and the lifelong problems that can give. And I wish you well, because I think you've done a brilliant job, and well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, just one other thing to say is that I think that sometimes our service users have found that them writing these things down has actually allowed their partners to understand more about their experience, because they're not having to just sit there and have difficult conversations. It's partners are being able to see what they've written down, which has been really useful, I think. So thank you.
And just to conclude, I think what value does this add to the work of the team? I've worked in these teams, not this particular one. Teams only work if people engage with them. People only engage if they trust the service. You only trust the service if you can see that it understands you. And I think it's these very specific little references that you only have if you've been through the experience. That's the magic that kind of as professionals, I think we can't give. And Ellie, I think your work really does that. It's profoundly moving to see that. So thank you very much. So.
Well, thank you so much, Ellie. Thanks you, Neil. Thank you, Jacqueline. Let's move on to our next item, please. Board assurance, Iffy, please.
Thank you, Chair. So colleagues would have seen from the board papers that risks have reduced from 15 to 14 compared to when we last met in January. The one risk that has been de-escalated is the reducing prone restraint, which the quality committee considered and took advice that they were given to de-escalate that risk. I think the board should be assured that the patient safety group will continue to look at this risk, and if it is felt that prone restraint is on the rise, then it will certainly make its way back up, but I hope not. The other thing to just mention, as you would have seen from the Business and Infrastructure Committee paper, is that Services and Carer Shadow Committee reviewed their risk along with risk of other committees and made some comments which have now been incorporated. And finally, Chair, just to say that we will at our May board meeting be discussing BAF in more detail, and so the chairs and the executive leads will have the opportunity to share with the board the reasons why they're on the register and their thoughts to date. Thank you.
Thanks, Iffy. Any questions for Iffy on that at all? If not, thanks very much. Sorry? Oh, Steve, sorry.
More of an observation in a way, Iffy. Thanks for that. We did briefly mention at the last meeting about ICB and redundancies. And as you say, we're going to come back to the BAF in a couple of months. I'm just beginning to think more and more that I was thinking initially the impact would be on the IT area. From what I'm hearing, it may be more around financial controls. And given recent experience with budgets within South East London, that could have an indirect impact on us. So it's not a question as such, but I just think we should just keep a watch on how that reduction in staff at the ICB affects us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any more questions for Iffy on the BAF? If not, just a brief report from me. Went to the national chairs meeting last week, and there's a full turnout from the NHSE board. Quite an interesting discussion. Firstly, from Richard Meddings, the chair, on the state of the NHS at the moment in relation to doctors, nurses, beds per head of population, the usual statistics that we know quite well, followed by a very contrasting presentation from Julian Kelly, who's in charge of the money, who had clearly had in some discussions prior to the budget yesterday. And that was a much more bracing discussion, in that we being the NHS, have more doctors than ever, more nurses than ever, more other staff than ever, and that productivity across the board has gone down. That was the theme. That was a very powerful theme that was coming through, that there's a massive recruitment across the NHS post-COVID. And yet, if you look at operations per surgeon, a whole range of different statistics, quite clearly, according to those stats, the productivity is under some great pressure. And I think this is not the first time we've heard this message come through. And then to some extent, when one looks at the budget yesterday about that 1.9% requirement for increase in productivity, and it'll take a little time, I think, for us to get to see what does this mean for the system? What does this mean for us in the sense of how do we describe our productivity against all of that? But it was quite an interesting discussion. But the message I felt was fairly powerful and fairly clear. So quite clearly, there's a train of pressure that comes through from the Treasury to the department, through to an HSE and through to the rest of the system. So I think this is an area where there'll be, and I think I read it correctly in the budget yesterday, quarterly reports on productivity improvements required going off into the future. And whatever happens on future regimes, I don't think the system will be looking at any vast increases in funding. So I think the issue for the NHS and the issue for us as a trust is being cognizant of all of those issues. The fact that I think productivity, and however we describe productivity, I think will be quite an issue for the future. But there was also discussions about discharge from wards and the usual sort of finger pointing, and let's get these words right, the pressure on local authorities to take people from wards, including our wards. A bit of a pushback from local authorities on, yes, they are under pressure, and we know from their finances at the moment that pressure will not ease up. So if we're looking for that to get better, it probably won't. The pushback was that whilst 2/3 of delayed discharges are to some extent to do with local authorities, 1/3 are to do with the NHS. And I thought that was an interesting statistic in itself about how the operational management grip that hospitals can have about how that what can they do in order to improve discharge rates. And I know we're working on that with our colleagues, but this is a national discussion that was going on at the time. Bring that down one level to the London chairs and the Cavendish Square Group. The Cavendish Square Group of Mental Health Trust chairs, I think, is perhaps not the power that it was, in that you've got fewer individuals because some people have now got multiple chairs. So the grouping is not as it was. And I think that would require some reflection. I don't know how it is for the COOs or the chief execs, but it's not, there are so many other arenas for us to talk, including within the ICB. And I think the future of the mental health Cavendish Squares groups, I think, is something to reflect on in the future. London chairs was very much looking at matters around inequalities, particularly looking at anchor institutions. And Suzanne, are you going to be party to that? I think you did volunteer, thank you, to go forward on that. And I think, I think it's really describing what we've done already, as far as that is concerned, and what we are planning to do in the future. I have a certain impatience with a fairly slow approach, I think, from these committees. I don't think this is a difficult concept around acute about anchor institutions. I think we know what it means. And I think if we're going to do it, let's do it. And I don't really think we need too much of a central direction on what to do. This is fairly clear what it involves. And if we think as a board, these are things we should do, then I think we should have a discussion and see where we've got to and where we think the next stage ought to be in this process. Because I slightly fear that if it's a NHS centrally driven, that does seem to take forever. And I think we can probably be a bit nimbler on our feet, I think, in organisations such as us. But this place, Queen Mary's, I think I can't remember if we discussed it last time, but Caroline Clark from the London Regional Director came here. We then had Iffy and I and Rachel and colleagues hosted Charles Alexander from Guy's and Tommy's and Mike Bell from LGT, who's also the chair of South West London ICS. And we've got the South East ICS, haven't we, coming, I think, in a couple of weeks or whatever. Very much sort of advertising what's happened here to the system. Because firstly, I think we're enormously proud of this place. I think this is an amazingly unique example of partnership from the public and private sector. And I think the very evidence of it as you walk around. But there's also opportunities for the region, opportunities for the ICB. And we know that we're going to have the diagnostic centre, hopefully, here. But there's still more opportunity on this site. That will depend upon CapEx, obviously. But my take on it is this is an ICS-owned place. There are opportunities here, but if those opportunities are not taken, then I think there are perhaps more opportunities for us as a trust to look to the future about what we would like on this site. Because we've talked, haven't we, about what would an ideal mental health setup look like. You could think about inpatient beds, community reception, sort of a multifactorial place for people to go, which used to exist, that we could do, and the impact of architecture and design on people's mental health. And when you look at Oxleas House or Green Park's house, they are not ideally designed for those things, I don't think. So I think there's lots of opportunities here. I do think that we run a good operation here, and thank you, Rachel, and everybody else involved in doing that. And I think you've handled it really, really well as far as partners are concerned, as far as the money is concerned. And I think it's a real exemplar to the system of what can happen if you leave your ego at the door and you're just a really good partner in how you operate things. And I don't want to sort of surprise you, Rachel, but any thoughts from yourself on what I've said, particularly around here?
The visit we have from the ICS in a couple of weeks will be really good to kind of get some feedback from them about how they see the site developing, and then some further discussions with local partners about the potential to develop the old A block site, which is empty, and I guess there's a conversation to have about whether that is developed in terms of mental health or wider community services. So yeah, there's lots of potential here that we'd really like to take forward.
Joe, please. Thank you.
Just wondered whether, as an adjunct to that visit, if we're thinking about mental health wards, we almost would want to take system colleagues to Oxleas House and then perhaps take them to the new facility at South West London St George's. So this is what a modern mental health ward looks like and everything about it, just to sort of start emphasising, life has moved on. Moved on, I guess, when Oxleas House had been built. But this is what the future looks like. This is such a better environment. So just start sowing those seeds, I think.
The other Oxleas House and Green.
Just a quick shout out there for co-production as well. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a place that was actually properly co-designed, not just by patients and carers, but by the communities as well? And that also plays to the equalities and the access that we really need to encourage. So yeah, I'm interested to see if George's did do that, and I believe they did. Yeah, I think there was a lot of involvement, so it'd be great if that does go ahead, and if we could seed that with the ICS as well. That's the approach to take, and that's us using our influence.
I think that's a really good point. I think obviously the huge challenge will be around capital and where that capital is, and having, I think, a series of plans in sort of descending order of what's achievable on what is I think, an absolutely fantastic site. And I know I think you and your department do deserve an awful lot of praise, and I want to pick out Holly, for she's just been brilliant about guided tours. She knows everything, and you can just get at the back of the group and let her get on with it, and it's great, actually, it really is. And the partnership with our colleagues, I think particularly Dartford and Gresham, is really good, and so well done to everybody involved in all of that. Azra, please.
Sorry, so I completely agree with everything that we've just said, but I'm just now going to bring the realism about the capital ask that we've got. So we've got a couple more years of some element of the strategic fund for Queen Mary's, that basically next year and I think the year after. Thereafter, we were very tight in ICS capital. So I think one of the things that we will need to seed, if this is the direction of travel, is we are going to have to look at national pots to be able to do this, because the cost of actually doing the full redevelopment for some of the quite ambitious plans we could have for this site will require a separate national pot, and that is a very stretched pot. So what I wouldn't want to do is to start a set of engagement which we're not going to be able to land, because this is going to be, I'm going to say, a much more long-term, I think, objective. And I'm talking kind of 10, 15 years if I'm looking at the overarching capital outlook. I think smaller projects we may be able to manage within the ICS, but I think that talks to what you were saying, Andy, about having that list and ranking of what do we think is achievable within these pots and what do we need to try and influence nationally in order to get funding.
You're absolutely right to bring a dose of realism to this, but I think also doing the visits. I really do think doing the visits, and then because at least the last two visits, people arrived with one view and left with another, without a doubt. I think they were quite taken aback by what's on this site. So that's a very good point. Just one last thing. I mean, a recent junior doctor strike. Thank you so much for all the hard work that goes in by everybody to deal with these matters, and I do appreciate just what a tough time that is for everyone, and to thank you all for, I think, again, some really incredible work over the last few months. So thanks very much, everybody, and I shall hand over, unless there's any further questions for me, I shall hand over to Iffy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andy. Again, my paper is in the bundle, but just a few things that I want to highlight. I'm going to, like Andy, start with the junior doctors strike action that ended last week. I think it's fair to say that on this occasion, there appears to have been more doctors, greater impact, particularly on our services. And although my paper does say that we sought to avoid cancelling appointments of those who've been cancelled previously, I don't quite think we achieved that. No word yet about any further strikes, but I suspect that there may yet be a few more. I also gather that the consultants, there has been additional funds on the table, and the BMA is encouraging consultants to accept the offer. What I don't know is what the impact will be if that is successful on the junior doctors. But I don't know, Abby, is there more you want to add in terms of the real impact it's had on patients in Oxleas?
Thank you, Iffy. So this is the 10th strike in a year. So we've had some patients that have been cancelled twice, but we've putting on extra clinics, and this is in community mental health. We're putting on extra clinics over the next 3 months to try and clear that backlog. We had some patients whose surgery was cancelled for podiatry, and they have been rebooked, but they haven't been cancelled twice. As Iffy said, we had a much larger number of our junior doctors take industrial action this time around, and they've still got the mandate to do that till the middle of the year. The consultant's contract has been upgraded It's going out to vote next week, March 14th. The vote closes on the 3rd of April, and the BMA leadership has recommended that it is approved. I think what we do need to note is that our SAS staff and associate specialist doctors rejected their offer, and they have been really pivotal in supporting when we had the junior doctor strike. They haven't said they will take industrial action at the moment, and they're still in discussions with the government. We haven't heard any update around the junior doctor offer at all. So.
Thank you, Abby. Just the thought of SAS and associate specialists going on strike fills me with a great degree of anxiety, frankly. Okay, I wanted to also just mention Martha's rule, which followed the coroner's ruling on the case of Martha Mills, who died from sepsis in 2021. The nub of it was that her family were really concerned that she was deteriorating, but their concerns were not responded to promptly by the clinical team. And so the coroner ruled that had the clinical team responded and had her transferred to the intensive care unit earlier, she may well have survived. On account of that ruling, we now have Martha's rule that requires all acute hospitals, particularly those that provide pediatric services, to have a critical care outreach team available to all staff 24/7, but also to families, carers, and advocates. And it also requires all NHS establishments to have a structured way of obtaining information about their patient's condition that would enable patients and families to pass information to the clinical teams. So it is proposed that 100 acute and pediatric trusts will participate in the initial work that this rule requires. And then on the back of that, other acute and pediatric trusts will follow suit. And in time, I don't know when, trusts such as ours, Mental and Community Health Trust, will then be expected to have similar arrangements. But I'm sure you'll appreciate that our arrangements will be fundamentally different from whatever arrangements there are in acute trusts. I want to touch on sexual safety and mental health wards. I think this is particularly important in the context of that conversation we had about buildings and whether our estate, for example, is fit for the future. So you may well have read or seen the media coverage in recent weeks, which followed freedom of information requests from a number of trusts. In 2017-18, the CQC carried out inspections and reviewed all the safety incidents reported by NHS trusts and prepared a report where they raised serious concerns about sexual safety in mental health organizations. On the back of that, NHS England then commissioned the Royal College of Psychiatrists to run a mental health safety improvement program. And we are participants in that program. And so what the exec have asked that the group who looks at this on our behalf in Oxleas do is to prepare a comprehensive report that looks at the impact of our participation over the last 3 years, looks at the trend of incidents, and see what further work we need to do. And I expect that will come to you, Susan, in the Quality Committee, and then we will hear more here at the board. You will also recall that a year ago, Abby brought to this board the work that was done within Oxleas on the back of the Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust Issues broadcast and the Panorama program. The independent review is out, and we are looking at the contents of that. But I think it's fair to also highlight that later this month, as part of the SLP Committees in Common meeting, that there will be the opportunity to see what lessons we can learn especially as Oxleas is a lead provider for forensic services in the SLP pathway. And so the lessons we want to learn will be mostly from the point of view of commissioning. How confident we are that when we commission, that we're also able to hold ourselves and our partners who provide services to account. So that will probably happen before we have the chance to discuss that again here at the board. And then finally, I want to just walk us through a few slides that we've got on the staff survey. The reports were embargoed until this morning, I think, and so it's quite timely that we, as a board, can look at our results. So we couldn't put this in a bundle. That's why we've got a set of slides up here, and I hope people can see it. So we've talked previously about a response rate of 56%, which was really good, and even when I compare to our neighbors. And you'll also recall the survey happened in October, November. The results that we've got here compares us to about 28 other trusts that provide similar services as ourselves, mental health, learning disability, and community health. But I think from today, it may be possible to see how we compare to a wider group of organizations. So these are just the trusts that the independent company that ran our survey had access to their data. Next slide. So the long and short of this is that it's really good news. So the pie chart to the left just looks at how we compare to our results from 22-23. So what you see is that in 37% of the questions, we have improved significantly compared to our last survey. But in 63%, although we improved, it wasn't statistically significant. We did not worsen in any of the questions. And I think that that really is impressive, because all too often what you find is higher response rate and results dip. But on this occasion, higher response rate, and it actually shows that we've done better in the last year compared to the year before. And the pie chart to the right just compares us to our comparators, so those 28 trusts that I talked about. And in 50% of the questions, significantly better than them. And in 44% of the questions, improvement, but no statistical significance. And in 6%, we did worse compared to our comparators. But still, I think, really positive result. Next slide. Now, the independent providers thought it worthy to say a few things, the research company, about our results. The first being that the results are overwhelmingly positive compared to the previous year, and the previous pie chart makes that point. And the score for staff recommending the organization as a place to work, really high. I think it's over 75%, and I think that that's impressive. And then the sub-theme, which last year people said they were under considerable work pressure, this year they've said that that work pressure is less. And we're, of course, going to look into that in some more detail. So that's the view of the research company as a starter for 10. Next slide. I don't know if you may not be able to see this, but the key thing to look at. So this just compares previous 2022 to 23 score, and that compares us to the sector. So these are just some questions or theme questions, which are mostly about people promise. So staff engagement, like I said, an improvement on 22 score, significantly better than comparators. Morale of staff, improvement on the previous year, again, significantly better when you compare us to comparators. And then we've got 7 people promise items here, one being compassionate and inclusive, again, better on our 22 score and significantly better when we compare to our comparators. Staff feeling that they're recognized and rewarded, better than 22, better than our comparators, but not significantly so. Staff feeling that they each have a voice that counts, again, better in 23 than 22, significantly better than our comparators. staff feeling that they are safe and healthy, better than last year, better than our comparators, but not significantly so. And people feeling that they're always learning, better than the previous year, significantly better than our comparators. People saying that they work flexibly, better, but not significantly so. And then people feeling that they work as a team, better than 22 and significantly better than our comparators. And so you see that this really is a survey result to be proud of. And I hope that we'll have the opportunity in our respective committees, including the exec, to just go over those. There are some areas to focus on, of course. Not surprised that I didn't want to touch on that. You know, our staff still complain about being discriminated against, still experiencing violence and abuse at work. And that has been an area of concern for many years, and we're just going to continue to focus on those. When you look at the team and directory breakdown, there's some degree of variation. We need to try and understand what that is and see how we learn. And also the need to ensure that all staff have their 6 weekly supervision and they have their annual reviews. The evidence that we have from Oxleas from years ago is that when staff get that, they really feel that they're listened to, they're supported, and they're helped to do their work. And then the final thing is the number of staff who have talked about doing overtime work that's unpaid, and we just need to try and understand that a bit more. So 2 more things I just want to pick up from my report, and then I'll hand back. We've had a couple of appointments, police executive lead appointments in the Southeast London ICS. The first is the police executive lead for Southwark, Darren Summers, and then hot off the press is another appointment for Bexley, Diana Braithwaite, who was the Chief Operation Officer until recently. Really delighted. We talked earlier about our role in our community as an anchor institution. Delighted that the MP for Erith and Thamesmead, Abena Hoponga Seria, was able to join us to open our woodland walk, which will be available not just to our staff, but will also be available to the local community. And then the final thing to say about our integrated performance overview, really pleased to see in the bundle the board visits to a number of teams where we have been somewhat challenged with managing demand. And I think that reading about those, certainly in Ian's report, and also looking at the data in the reading room, just helps to give a 360 on the efforts that the staff are making to manage what must be very challenging circumstances to work. And then finally, I hope that in part 2, we'll be able to discuss not just our financial outturn as an ICS this year, but also the initial thoughts regarding our planning for 24-25. And as everyone would know, I think the years ahead, and indeed, as you've said, Andy, the years ahead will be quite challenging for the NHS. And I'll stop there, Andy.
Yes, I've just been hot off the press looking at the national staff survey results. And actually that positive position against 50 other similar organisations, that's held. So in all the areas we are higher than average. And it looks like for staff involvement nationally, we are at the top. So that's very positive.
Good, well done. Some excellent results there. Well done, everyone. Thank you. Any questions for Iffy at all, please? Suzanne.
It's not a question so much as a couple of comments. So the first one is about Martha's rule. I think that as a trust, we should really look forward to and positively embrace Martha's rule. And I recognise that there's going to be a certain degree of testing of it within, the acute and paediatrics. But I think that we ought to be really forward-looking and active in trying to learn from that, and should aim to be a leader in the field when it becomes possible to start introducing it. I think it's so valuable to patients. So I would hope that we would want to be not just an early adopter, but one of the first adopters. And I'd be interested to know whether that be the view of our clinicians. The other point I'm a little bit concerned about is going back to the Edenfield report. We had a discussion as a board when we first heard, had some information about Greater Manchester. And one of the things which gave me a little bit of comfort at that stage was to look at the provision of the independent mental health advocates. And people may recall that we did a specific piece of work looking at how they were functioning. It was slightly patchy across our trust, but there was one place that they did seem to be functioning very well, which was in the forensics area. So I found that quite comforting. But then I read the final report from Manchester, and one of the things that was disappointing was that their IMHAs hadn't picked up some of the issues which were then subsequently identified. So I wonder whether we perhaps need to sort of revisit that a little bit and to try and understand the extent to which, firstly, we have a consistent IMHA service across the trust, because I don't think we do, and I think that we perhaps needs a bit of focus. And then the other issue would be, why didn't the IMHAs pick up some of the stuff that was going on at Edenfield, and can we be confident that our IMHAs here would pick that up?
So, Susan, thanks a lot for that, particularly the point about Martha's rule. And I think that we perhaps need to strengthen our peer discussion arrangements, which currently Abby and colleagues are seeking to ensure that those who are in hospital have the opportunity to be discussed. So consultants, both across community and inpatient, will discuss patients who are in hospital to just make sure that we're affording them the best clinical views about how we manage them. So your point is really about how do we fast track this, because it may be 2 or 3 years before Martha's rule comes to community and mental health, and we'll perhaps go away and reflect on that. And I also wanted to just talk about the Edenfield, that as part of the review that's going on at the Bracton, we will want to make sure that when we bring something back to the board, or when we have the chance to discuss that, that we weave that in. And then finally, we had Dame Ruth May visit yesterday, visited for colleagues who don't know her, she's the Chief Nursing Officer for NHS England, visited immunization team in Greenwich, Youth Justice and School Nursing. I was really delighted with what she saw, discussions she had, and the staff were excited to meet with her. So that was impressive.
That's really good that she visited. Any further questions, please, Melissa?
Just a question about Martha's rule and sort of what it means. And I guess first, for my understanding, in that tragic case, did the trust follow its own policies and procedures correctly, and then there was still the tragic outcome? Or was there a sort of a failure in there that might have been picked up by a review? And so, therefore, this review that's being proposed, is it meant to be to check that that care is in accordance with what it should be, or is it meant to be a second medical opinion? What is the purpose of that?
So I think it's the latter. I don't think it's about there being clear policies. So this is more about every organization having almost like a reference group that concerns are expressed to, who will then support the clinician. So this will be available to staff and families. So it's something really new. My concern, of course, is that we get it right, because this is about patient safety and reducing mortality across the NHS.
Anything else? Oh, yes, please, Jane.
I just wanted to say that our children and young people's nurses yesterday really did us proud. The school nurses were amazing, and Dame Ruth May was seriously impressed. And I think the presentations they gave and the case studies they presented are a real testament to the incredible work they do. And I just wanted to say thank you publicly to them.
Really well said. I mean, it's so good that she could visit. Was this Abby, please?
I just wanted to add something in around Martha's Law. I think some of the foundations to it is listening to carers and families. And that's what we try to do here anyway. And it just probably needs to have a much more formal setting, because they were saying this is a difference, something has changed. And that's what that they didn't get the reassurance, or they didn't feel listened to, and they were right. So we started doing that in mental health, listening to the family experience and what they are telling us, and it's just a way of formalizing it. So what Suzanne has asked, we probably need to go away and think about it, because in mental health and community physical health, deterioration can be quite, there's a variation. So we will do that.
Suzanne, please.
I think this is probably something for a further discussion, and I would welcome that in future. I think it's extraordinarily difficult for people's support networks to challenge and ask questions about the quality of care that people are getting, and not least in mental health, because quite often family members' views can be discounted as being in some way malign in some cases, and in others completely misguided. And if we look back at the serious incidents that happen in mental health, in almost every single one of them, they will say that the family's views were not taken into account, and that the family's attempts to alert staff to things that were going wrong were not met with a degree of openness by staff. So I think it's worth us taking the opportunity of Martha's Rule to think about this in the broader sense. It's not to do with sepsis and critical care outreach. It's to do with how far do we really listen, and what do we do when people are raising issues from a place which we think in our professional wisdom is not appropriate. And it's setting aside that sense of sort of professional hubris and saying, you know what, it may be in this situation that the family knows better than we do, and we really need to take that on board. So I'm hoping that we could come back to this at a sort of future point and look at it not in the narrow sense of Martha's Rule, but what is the need for Martha's Rule telling us about the way that professionals behave.
I think that's a really, really good point, Suzanne. I was just trying to think where this will get picked up further. Will that be through quality committee? Sophie?
Just to add, when it is picked up and when it is examined, could we look at forensics and prisons as well? And that comes on the back of a visit with PACT last week, and the real impacts of family input into the care there. So just to make sure that they aren't forgotten about. Also, I don't know if that's within the remit of the law, but it might be something to be considered.
So Andy's question is, where do we review this? Abby?
I would say quality committee, because it's about patient experience and clinical effectiveness, which all sits within quality committee anyway.
I think we can review it, but I worry about a paper exercise, because this is more about a cultural way of practicing. So when I think about support network engagement 2, which has been around for, 5-7 years, we still find that some people complete it, others don't. And even where it's completed, people don't really do more. It's about identifying those in your support network and engaging them. So there's perhaps something additional that we need to consider in terms of how we help staff to open up and engage with that support network.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Effie. There's no further question there. I was just thinking about the school nurses, and I was thinking about the preparation for senior school. The little programs that we do during the summer. I don't know if the school nurses do that or it's someone else who does that. Speech and language do it. Just a reminder for colleagues, as I won't be here next summer, but every now and again they advertise the programme, and I really would encourage NED colleagues to go along. It's inspirationally good for what they do, and it happens during the summer. They set up they mirror a school, they help people prepare for the next stage, and it's actually quite a moving event, I think, as well. So, and I've managed to do most of the last few summers. It'd be really good if that got picked up when that gets advertised, and whoever's doing it, please advertise it well in advance so people can get around and see it. Okay, thanks very much. Ian, please.
Just to agree with you, Andy, I was moved to tears the summer I went in a good way, and some really fantastic work going on there, and really a multidisciplinary approach, and a great advert for our allied health professionals. Thank you, Chair. In the reading room, you'll have seen the detail from each of the directorates around their current challenges, opportunities and developments. On the front sheet, I've tried to draw out some of those key issues. So I'll just take a moment to walk you through those. So starting off with acute and crisis mental health services, there continues to be a huge focus on recovering our acute mental health position. The bed recovery programme has started and still has some way to go, but we are starting to see a little bit of movement. There's a noticeable reduction in admissions through ED, both formal and informal. I think there's more work to be done around supporting colleagues to take positive risks and work across directorate boundaries to come up with alternatives to admission where it's appropriate to do so. The big focus, though, is on length of stay in both our Oxleas beds, but also in private sector beds as well. And to support the directorate, we have been doing some thinking around our current governance structure within the directorate and how we might either repurpose some of the current meetings that are used to kind of manage our beds, or to introduce new ones. And this is for two reasons, really: to tackle the number of people who we have on our wards with very long lengths of stay, often not linked to being clinically ready for discharge, but for other reasons. And then also to drive where we really want to get to, which is having an average length of stay of 30 days or less. So myself and other exec members who are on the bed recovery programme board are working with Rachel Townsend and Ashling to think about how we support that. But it will involve exec members getting more involved in the detail over the next few weeks. And it's something that I think the directorate leadership team see as a very positive thing. And then alongside that, we're in the early stages of looking at the balance of our older people's mental health capacity and our working age mental health capacity, and to see whether there's anything more we could do to kind of rebalance the proportion that's available, because as we all know, the pressure is really within working age. So that's something that we will continue to look at over the next few months. I just wanted to highlight in community mental health, partly because it's been a performance exception for the last few months, but our talking therapies service in Greenwich has achieved their access target in January. In the paper, you'll see some of the work that they've undertaken to achieve this. And woven into that is some really great examples of how they have tried to target the access of different groups with protected characteristics. And they are really doing some excellent work around that. And I'm hopeful still that we will have an opportunity at a future board meeting to hear from them directly about that work, because it really does speak to the inequalities work that we're trying to take forward. Having said that, obviously the what we need to now look at is sustaining that improvement. And you'll have seen in the detail of the report that as access goes up, there's always the possibility that it impacts on recovery rates. But that is the dynamic that the team are holding all the time. I've also drawn out some detail across several directorates, noticeably children, young people and adult community health, about initiatives to get on top of demand. I just wanted to highlight the work that's been going on within CAMS. The directorate have really made some huge strides in the last year in reducing the long waits for assessment. And although there is still some way to go, currently there are only 14% of those who are waiting over 44 weeks. And the service expects this to reduce to 0 by the end of April. So I think the directorate feels confident that they will deliver on the ICB ambition around that. And that's a huge movement from the beginning of the financial year. So 52 plus week waits have actually reduced by 77%. So that's quite a significant reduction. You'll see in the pack that the longest waits are within the LDND pathway, and it was really great actually to see that in the board visit section there was a visit to one of the LDND teams. And just to clarify, that isn't the same as the neurodevelopmental diagnostic pathway, which is often gets confused. So this is the pathway for people who already have a diagnosis of LDA, but need specialist mental health input. And once we're on top of the assessment weights, the challenge remains behind that to then get on top of the weights for treatment. So you'll have seen in the performance dashboard that the RTT data for CYP is skewing the overall position. But as I've explained before, the focus has really been on the front door and then to start working on the RTT behind that. I mentioned specialist children's services and the weights for neurodevelopmental diagnosis. This does still remain high, and in fact it remains high in adult services as well. There are a number of pieces of work underway looking at that, and I will be bringing back a more detailed report through the exec quality committee and the board in the future. And I'm working with the ICB around taking a leadership role across the whole of the sector around some of these neurodevelopmental diagnostic weights. So I'll be able to update you on that in due course. And I think I will stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ian, and good news on the improvement in the waiting time. So really well done. Jo, please.
Yeah, I think it was a really good report. I just wanted to pick up on the adult learning disability. So the annual leader report, which, as it says on page 32, did show some improvements for 2022. I don't think a statistician would call them significant. And it's just to reiterate that report comes out every year and it tells the same story. And wouldn't we feel so much better about things if South East London was a positive outlier there? So I guess it's my encouragement that if we could possibly, and I know there's financial struggles everywhere, but to get this on the agenda for the ICS board as part of the inequalities stream, because I know in our papers there's a something that says how complete we are on our Oliver McGowan training. I wish I had equal confidence that our acute colleagues and primary care were worrying equally about it, because I think we're doing great work, and it just feels to me it doesn't take a lot. When we look at these reports and the learning from them, they are the same things all the time. It's capacity, it's passports, it's people being treated appropriately. And that goes an awful long way, and ultimately we still see death certificates with learning disability on, which, in this day and age is terrible. So if we could possibly manoeuvre a discussion on this, but I just think getting this up the agenda, getting our colleagues worried about rolling that training out as a start. It's very comprehensive training. It could just really transform the landscape. And I think it would be really great if South East London could be a shining beacon in terms of this is how it's done.
That's a really good point, Jo. Any thoughts from exec colleagues on that? Jane, please.
Clearly, we discussed this at length at the Mortality Surveillance Committee, and both Abby and I have recently been picking up concerns with our counterparts in the acute sector. And I've had really positive feedback from the acute sector where I have raised these concerns, and they're grateful for us raising concerns. And some of these have been picked up aside from leaders, so they may be concerned with family experiences that haven't been captured in the reports. So I think this is, Jo's quite right, this is a really important thing that we have to push up the agenda. I've got confidence in our staff and our leaders in the learning disabilities teams that they're playing their part, but they can only do so much. And I think we really need to support them to get this really higher nationally and certainly on the ICS agenda more.
Just to add to what Jane said, I think there is an opportunity directly into the RB executive to try and have a better conversation about it. I'm there as the kind of mental health collaborative representative. I think we can kind of incorporate conversations about people with learning disability under that. So I'm very happy to kind of raise it, and I'm sure Iffy and David would want to do the same as well.
Abby, please.
We also had a refresh of our masterclasses with primary care recently, and they're very interested and want us to take forward the work we're doing around adult learning disabilities. So we will incorporate that into the educational opportunities we have with them as well.
Thanks very much. Stephen.
Firstly, congratulations, I think, to the team in many of the trajectories Andy's mentioned about the waiting list, particularly 77% reduction is extraordinary. Two questions from me. First of all, very interesting about the What Matters to You event, which seems to have great potential. Could we attend that to watch it in action? Because I think it would be, good learning exercise. Secondly, just on right care, right person, certainly from the Met perspective, it's working very well. Figures from the Met for November, December are that it saved about 30,000 hours at least. Figures are still coming in. They think it could be as high as 50,000, which initially I thought was ridiculously high and couldn't be true. But then there's 32,000 police officers in the Met, so you look at it that way, an hour per policeman, it's probably quite feasible, but it's clearly been a great success for them. They're very happy about it. So I'd be interested in your views on that, how you think it's working from our perspective and from an NHS perspective.
Thanks, Steve. I think overall it appears to be going well. What's quite interesting is that the the number of central meetings that were driving the programme, the frequency of those meetings has really reduced over the last 2 or 3 months, which feels quite significant in a way, and it may be because there is a level of confidence that things are going well. Having said that, there are still a number of outstanding pieces of work which need to be delivered, again, to help with successful implementation. And from an Oxleas point of view, we are driving quite a few of those. So Aisling, following the success of creating a pan-London mental health AWOL policy, she's been working on an adjunct of that for CAM services, and also a welfare check policy for mental health providers. So that has been more or less finalised by the working group. There's a few last minute additions required, and then that will go around providers for approval and then implementation. And I know that Abby has been leading the work around kind of training and workforce that will supplement that and will help with the implementation. So that's about to commence as well. The big area, I think, is probably and where there's been continues to be some unease is actually outside of kind of mental health services. So I think local government and other parts of the health sector, I'm still picking up a degree of concern that things aren't going as well as they would hope, but it's very hard when you have those conversations to elicit any detail. It's more of a feeling that people are conveying. I mean, the central programme is trying to mitigate that by doing a parallel piece of work to the one with mental health providers around welfare checks. That's being driven by London ADAS, and that is trying to create a framework for what is a fairly kind of disparate system around how they work with the police in future around welfare checks. I spoke at the London coup meeting alongside colleagues from LAS and the Met a month or so ago, mainly acute coups in the room. They seemed fairly relaxed. Things seem to be going well. I think partly because of the 136 hubs, there's been a real reduction in the number of conveyances under Section 136 to ED, which for them is quite a significant barometer. But I think the whole area of welfare checks and people walking out of ED remains something that, with the assistance of Matthew Trainer, we will continue to have a conversation with acute providers about. And then the last thing to say, and I know, Andy, you'll be very aware of this, there has been some work undertaken between the LAS and the Met, because on occasion there has possibly been a kind of diversion of demand away from the Met to the LAS, which wasn't appropriate. But I think that's understood, and action is being taken to address that. So overall, I think still a fairly good picture. The rest of the country seems to now be looking to London around how we've implemented it and looking to learn lessons. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And thanks for your role in this. I think having Ian, having Matthew and others working together has really accelerated this and put some practical policies in place, which has been really heartening. And I think it's gone a long way to making this a lot less of a challenge than we thought it might be, because it's getting practical people doing it. And I think the reasons those meetings have gone down at the so-called strategic level is because the work doesn't get done there. The work actually gets done by people like yourself and colleagues. So thank you. Any other questions at all for Ian on that? If not, should we have a quick 10-minute break? And then I see lots and lots of urgent nods around the room. Right. Okay. Thank you. We're going to board visits now. It seems to be a bit of a Sophie show, doesn't it? I think you can be reassured that colleagues will have read. So over to you to highlight the salient points, please, Sophie.
Yes, it was. I think this was Jim last time, wasn't it, with hundreds of prisons. So yeah, first of all, Bromley CAMS. Rachel, do chip in as well. Anything comes up, but as you've heard, this place is really, really good. We had a really positive visit, really interesting because we'd been there a year before when they'd be talking about their plans to work on waiting lists. They were very aware of the challenges and the risks, but they'd really thought about them and talked about them with colleagues, and so they mitigated against them. And then we came back this visit, and it was really, really good to see the results. So real tangible results, a lot of engagement in the board visit from everybody there. There was a focus on partnership working, and again, very honest and upfront about the challenges of partnership working with Bromley Y, with local GPs, but a really positive outlook on it and a very constructive conversation. So that was everything I think that we picked up there, the main points. If anyone's got any questions.
Talked a lot about this at the last quality committee. But just to tease out something which I think is referenced in the bundle. Bromley, of course, we don't deliver specialist children's services, and that's where the neurodevelopmental diagnostic weights sit. So they're undertaken by Bromley Healthcare, but for a number of reasons I'm not going to go into, the custom and practice has developed that any request for an assessment for children over the age of 7 is undertaken by Bromley CAMS, which we're not actually commissioned to do. So Lisa and colleagues have been working closely with Place to be good partners and to support that, and we've got plans to do that in the short term. But what I just wanted to highlight is some really good progress around discussions for that to sit back with Bromley Healthcare. So Bromley Healthcare will be doing that in the future. There's going to be some investment on their part in the training and capacity. So in the medium term, that activity will move back where it should be delivered. But highlight it because we talked about it in the quality committee, and that some of that detail wasn't available then.
Okay, so moving on to the next one, which was for acute and crisis. This was Oak Tree Lodge Memorial, and I went there with Azra and Alison. So please again do chip in if I missed out anything. This was an interesting visit because very different from the previous one, because the team there had been the subject of focused assurance visits and various other visits, and so it was interesting to note that this board visit was very much received in that same way. We were coming to look for potential issues. So there was, as I say, it was a different atmosphere. However, that broke down quite a bit when we had a group of frontline team members who talked to us alone. So it was an interesting visit. Again, take the paper as read. A few things that stood out. There were some estates issues which have now been addressed. It's really good to hear. And it was good to see the engagement with the patients. There was a lot of activity going on that wasn't put on for our behalf, and patients did look genuinely happy and engaged to be part of it. Period of transition as well for the team, which I think also came across, thinking about Oak Tree Lodge, the length of stay of patients there, what's the remit. So there was all of that sort of influx while we were visiting, and I think that came across. Just one thing as well, the freedom to speak up service, which we did ask about. Staff weren't aware, and a few of them wrote it down, which I always find quite interesting to see. But overall, I think it was a visit that had practical outcomes.
That freedom to speak up is interesting, isn't it? About what more needs to be done to advertise that within that service, even if it's just a matter of posters and things such as that. But the other thing was the estates issues. Some of this stuff seems sort of like everyday stuff that it takes a visit. And you do wonder about how empowered the local supervisors are to just get things done, you know.
So I will just say for that, I think I see that on lots of board visits, and it's something that's got stuck. Sometimes for us, it was a door that hadn't got fixed because it had just got stuck somewhere in the system. And I think that's what board visits are very good at, is identify where it's got stuck and unsticking it. But you're right, in an ideal world, it shouldn't happen.
No, I mean, it shouldn't take when's the next visit there? We can't wait 2 years for a door, can we? It's not criticism of the states. I sometimes think I just get a bit frustrated about why people just don't get things done locally and get on with it, because they are in a position to do things. And I always think proceed until apprehended, just get on and do it, and it's unfortunate. Do you find that at all?
Seem to be quite good relationships between the facilities managers who are out and about talking to people and the local team. So that works on one level, but then sometimes for some reason something gets stuck and it doesn't get raised, and people will say, oh, I've been telling them this needs doing, but it's never quite clear who the they is. So there might be something about us, not advertising, that's not right, making sure that all the local teams know who their local facilities manager is and who to contact so they can escalate things appropriately. I mean, the bath was a particularly huge frustration that ended up with an email exchange between myself, Jane and Ashley, but we got there in the end. So.
I was going to say that Simon, who's our Freedom Stick Up Guardian, he really does his very best to kind of get out absolutely everywhere, and he goes to our senior staff events, he goes to lots of things. It does really help when we ask about it in board visits, because it's another way of just getting that message out there. So thank you for all the efforts that you do about asking about it when you're out and about. There are posters, there are lots and lots of posters, but sometimes we've been there when people have had a backdrop of his face and you've asked if they know about the Guardian service, and they've said they've never heard of it, and the screens, sometimes it's just difficult to get that message across there, but I think we're getting there.
So I was just going to reflect on the improvements that had actually happened though in Oak Tree Lodge during that period of time. So just emphasising they'd had a huge amount of focus, and I think it was a different atmosphere, although I will absolutely reflect what Sophie said. It was a little bit more stilted at the beginning, and it was really useful to be able to actually tread the boards within that ward, to actually speak to some of the people and that actually see some of the service user engagement.
Yeah, just on the freedom to speak up, and I know Sophie mentioned it in two of her reports. On my visits, I find the awareness really excellent, and it's rare that people haven't heard of. Sometimes they're not sure of all the mechanics of it, of how it works, but general knowledge of it, I think, is actually very good.
Next one, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and yes, I just only ever mention it when people don't know. So I don't mention it when they do know, so that doesn't come across. Okay, so the next one we've already spoken about today, which is LDND CAMS. This one is in Greenwich. Again, I'll take it as read. A team that's doing some really, really complex work that involves a great many partners, and as a result has challenges because of the difficulties with those pathways. But I hope what comes across here is the dedication of that team, because it really was apparent when we visited them, and the pressures that they're under and the way in which they're addressing those pressures. It was really interesting to see. I think I took away from that one staff member she'd identified a gap in provision, and she really wanted to take that forward, and she wanted a way of finding out how she could work with commissioners and with others to do that. And I thought that was really interesting, and she was then supported in doing so following the meeting. So I thought that was a great example of how staff are really being empowered to say when they feel that there is a gap and what needs to be done about it. So I thought that was something to mention. Yeah.
Any questions on that one? If not, you got one more on the quality management team, is that right? No, well, while you've got the floor.
This was an excellent visit. I would recommend everyone go see this team. Obviously, not all at once, but I just thought it was a really good way to get a helicopter perspective of the whole of the trust. The team were really engaged. They were very supportive of each other. It was very collaborative. It was a really good example of a hybrid meeting being held very well as well. Great many team members there in person, but also given the nature of their work in the Southwest, others having to dial in. I think the things that are outlined in the actions are things that people are aware of. The complexities of working with other parts of the trust in terms of comms and data. So yes, they were all raised here as actions, but they were all things that people felt very passionate about. I should say afterwards as well, a lot of people came up to me and said what great culture the team had and how happy and proud they were to work there, and how they felt that this helped them work better with all the different directorates that they have to work with. So I came away from that feeling very positive and having learnt a lot.
Very good.
Just to add that Abby and I received an email, I think yesterday or the day before, letting us know that this team of all the corporate teams had the best staff survey results. It sounds as though your visit really, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Abby.
And they had an away day yesterday and used their vouchers to buy a pizza lunch. So they were quite happy. Pizza for lunch. Yeah, quite happy about that.
Well done. Thanks for those visits. Thank you, Sophie. Suzanne, please.
So there's not much to add to the report on Bexley MSK. I just wanted to pick out a couple of things. First of all, I think what's interesting to me is triangulating what we see in board reports with what we're hearing through the Improving Lives reviews and the more formal assessments of services that we see at our Quality Committee. And there was a very definite sense visiting MSK that they are a truly outstanding team. And you'll have seen in the quality report that their Improving Lives reviews identified them as great. So there's a very strong evidence base. We only talked to, because most of the staff were clinically busy, we only spoke to a couple of people, but the two members of the team who we did speak to, who were working clinically and gave us time in their break, really emphasised that they find the way in which the service is organised provides them with very interesting work, and it builds a commitment to that service, that they are fulfilled as professionals, and a very strong sense of that came over. And the last thing that I'd say, and we've identified the quality of the website in the report, they have an absolutely brilliant website. It is better than the NHS website. And since the visit, I've spent time looking at it to try and identify what my yoga-related musculoskeletal problems might be. So if any of you need to have a look, do look and do recommend it, because it's fabulous, a really helpful tool.
My mother's using it too.
Anything else for Suzanne on that? If not, thanks very much. So thanks for these visits. I think the point that that there's been made about triangulating from what we see to actually going out on the ground, I think it's really vital, actually. So thanks for all the effort that's gone into that. We go on to the Quality Committee report, please, Suzanne.
So I am going to take it that people will have read this. I think the difficulty with reporting from the Quality Committee is that we meet monthly and we have very busy meetings, and then we try and prepare a synopsis of the key material to come to the board. I think that the synopsis this month, or this bi-monthly synopsis, captures the key things. I just wanted to pull out a couple of points. And again, thinking about what we hear about the quality of our services when we go and visit them, the Quality Committee hears about this from the quality assurance self-assessments that people do, and those give us one kind of picture. And the pictures that we get, I think, are pretty accurate in that it's a combination of self-assessment and the Improving Lives reviews. And so there's only a paragraph on this in the report. We had presentations in terms of directorate feedback from acute and crisis and adult learning disabilities. That they're very informative presentations. We spend about half an hour with the directorate on each of the quality committee meetings. We have a thorough discussion with them about where their challenges and improvement areas are. I think that to pull out from the acute and crisis and ALD, there's no doubt that ALD is outstanding across the board. I mean, it comes across really clearly when they give us the feedback, and particularly about the improvement work that they do. Is very compelling, the amount of improvement work that's going on. Acute and crisis is obviously more patchy. They're very clear with us about the areas where they recognise there are some difficulties and where particular wards might present difficulties. And again, we generally have a pretty candid discussion with them about how things are going. Just to pick out a couple of other things which I think are notable. We're still waiting on the metrics to be fully developed for the clinical effectiveness group, and we're anticipating that the next time that group reports to the quality committee, that those metrics will have been developed, and we'll be able to begin to see more outcome data being presented to us by that group, and we're eagerly awaiting the completion of that work. Another point which I just wanted to emphasise, because there's only a line of it about the mental health legislation oversight group. I'm really, really pleased that one of the things that's been introduced is that there will be, as part of the Improving Lives programmes, specific Mental Health Act reviews. So this will mean, in effect, no surprises in terms of CQC subsequently doing Mental Health Act reviews, because we will be doing ourselves that work beforehand. And then the final thing to say was that we had a fabulous presentation on leg ulcer management. It was very informative. For those of you who don't know about leg ulcer management, and I knew very little, it was a really compelling presentation. Somebody who's done some fabulous work, making a huge difference in the lives of people who potentially really need our help on this. So it was very encouraging and a good piece of improvement work.
Well, that's so good to hear. Thank you, Suzanne. There's a couple of issues on the report about wanting to alert the board. There was around the prisons and around care planning. I just wondered, either yourself or Ian, any observations on those 2 points, or anyone else for that matter?
I mean, I'm happy to speak to the prisons one, and maybe Abby might like to speak to the care planning one. We were disappointed to see HMP Wandsworth back on the naughty step. We've monitored HMP Wandsworth quite closely in the past, as people will know. I think the issues that are now arising in HMP Wandsworth are arising and have become visible from a number of patient deaths, or rather from prisoner deaths, not all of whom have been our patients, but it does indicate that it's a prison that is in difficulties. And I think that some of the challenges that we have got there are to do with the difficulties in the prison, to do with the difficulties of staffing it on the justice side, on the nature of the estate, which we have significant difficulties in getting HMP to improve. The Earlstoke and HMP Bristol we've talked a little bit about before, and Ian might want to add to that. They've not been there have been, they've been difficulties which we've known about once we moved into the southwest. What we're doing as a committee is we've agreed that the committee will receive an improvement plan, which we will monitor in the same way that we're monitoring the improvement plans from other areas where some of the metrics have been consistently not being met. And so we're using the same approach as we are, for example, with the referral to treatment pathways, of just really closely monitoring it and supporting the people who are doing the work. Did you want to say some more about Earlstoke and Bristol?
Yeah, no, thanks, Suzanne. I mean, just to add to Wandsworth, I think the number of prisoners subject to ACT is the highest that they've ever had. Talking to Peter Stevens yesterday. I mean, in terms of HMP Bristol, there are similarities with Wandsworth. Obviously, they're both remand prisons. Just to say that the work that was needed by healthcare as part of the overall improvement plan for the prison has now been completed. And the focus, and I was with commissioners down in Bristol yesterday, the focus is really back with the prison on creating the right environment. It continues to have some very negative press about being the most violent prison in the country. So our healthcare staff are really kind of working under some very difficult conditions, but I think there is a sense that there are improvements in healthcare itself, and that's been recognised by the governor. I mean, Earlstoke is an interesting one. I don't know how many people have been to visit it. It's actually extremely remote, and there are kind of two big issues there. One is linked to its setting, in that workforce challenges are particularly acute there. The nearest sort of major urban conurbation is Swindon, and that's quite some way away. So recruitment has been a challenge, although I think it's improving. And then the other big issue there, which has led to quite significant prisoner patient harms, is around illicit drug use, and particularly spice. So the commissioners were saying yesterday it's a category C prison with category B problems. But there's a new governor, relationships with healthcare are very good, and she is proving quite a dynamic presence there. So I think there is a hope that Earlstoke, we will start to see improvements. And then the last thing to say, there is and this is one of the things we hoped for by operating across quite a wide geography. There is a kind of informal remand network that we've set up between our healthcare teams, Wandsworth, Bristol and Exeter. So they're really taking the opportunity to learn. And as Sophie said before, we were both down at Wandsworth yesterday, and last week, and we were hearing about some of that stuff. So yeah.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks very much indeed. Joe, sorry. Abby first, then please. Yeah.
I was going to talk about care planning. We had paused the care planning audit a few months ago following a deep dive, which showed that we needed to work with directorates around improving the quality of the care plans. And we were hoping to launch that, but we've now got a new software for audits, and we just was a capacity issue, both in some of the directorates and in our team around that, but that hopefully will be resolved. So we're hoping to restart it by April.
Thank you. Joe, please.
Yeah, just going back to prison. So at Mortality Review Committee, we went through the deep dive that forensics have done, or in terms of those recent deaths at Wandsworth. We will also have the Bristol review come to us. And I was really struck by the action plan that was put in place was really thoughtful and really innovative, I thought. And certainly it's interesting what you say, Ian, about having that sort of informal remand, because remand prisons are different, aren't they? And they present a lot of different challenges. And, I think we're not a million miles away from actually saying, this is how we think healthcare should work in those remand prisons, and using that to influence commissioners. We've got enough experience now, I think, and start maybe sort of pushing our weight around a bit more.
I think it's a really good point. Thanks for all the work and effort everyone puts into this. Ian, you've got a lot on your plate and travelling around a lot as well at the same time. So thanks for what you're doing in there. And if these two items could come back, they've been highlighted to alert to the board.
So I just wanted to say, before we move on from prisons, I really regret talking about Wandsworth as being on the naughty step. I mean, it was a foolish way to put it. because I think the staff there are doing really, really well in the context of some very difficult circumstances. So that was the wrong way to put it. It's more that, it's back on our horizon as somewhere that is challenged.
Yeah, so thank you. So just if those two matters could come back for the next one, please, for an update, I'd be grateful. And then partnership committees, please, Jo.
Yes, so just one matter in alert, and I think it's a good alert rather than a bad alert, which is with our three sort of provider collaboratives within the SLP, we're going through an exercise with commissioners to sort of hopefully get another 3 years or so on those contracts, and we reviewed those business cases. I think generally the centre is happy with them, so I'd expect us to have those confirmed shortly. We had quite a good update on where we are with bed closures in the children's wards, which has been an issue now for some time and is having significant knock-on effects in terms of those service users, and to some extent reversing a lot of the positivity that we achieved by bringing children closer to home because we're having to use private beds. It's slow progress, I think we would say, and look forward to the next update on that. But I think it was quite good to get that level of transparency that perhaps we hadn't had before on that. 111 and 136, there was updates on here. I think that's worked well doing it at the SLP level. I think that's been quite effective. And I think they've achieved an awful lot actually in a very short space of time. I know lots of people here were heavily involved as well. And then the final thing to mention, which is on the top of whatever page that is, page 64, there's been a review commissioned into the SLP Fit for the Future. And I think a draft report of that is floating around. I think there's some interesting things in that report, interesting good and interesting. And there's further work going on that. And I guess at some point, if that will come back to board appropriately. That's all I was going to say.
So it was just to update at the last portfolio board, we heard that we've actually had those approvals now come through. There was some additional questions that had been asked that we reviewed also at portfolio board in terms of the responses. So we have got those contracts now over that period of time, and that has come with a 0.8% increase in net tariff across those areas for next year.
Thanks, Azra. Anything else on partnership? Yes, please, Sophie.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I was just wondering, given that we want to focus more on, partnership and collaboration, and we focus on SLP partnership and collaboration primarily in this committee, is there any consideration in the future that we look at partnership more broadly? And I understand that each different partnership that we're part of is mapped to a separate governance arrangement, but would it be useful for us as a board to have that oversight? For example, we talked about LPP last time. We talk about PACT. We're looking at partnerships with our primary care colleagues. Partnership is a huge thing within the ICS. So would it be possible to bring it together at some point to have a review so we can see where we are and see what we can learn from each one of those partnerships, common threads?
Just to flag up that we are due a review of the board and committees. I think a lot of the committees are doing their reviews currently, and we're a year or so on since our well-led review and the changes we made. So I think it's quite timely to have a look at that, and I think maybe we could actually ask a explicit question around that, and see how we can put that into our structure going forward. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question about this review. So that sounds quite major to me. So who's reviewing it? Why? What's it about? What's the outcome supposed to be? What are we going to learn about the quality of work that's being offered under the SLP? Do we know? Is there an answer to that?
Right. Okay. We're all kind of looking at each other. So the scope is not as broad as you've just outlined. And in fact, in hindsight, we perhaps could have extended to some of those things you've talked about. I think the core of it was about whether we have a hub in the SLP that's fit for the future, particularly with respect to commissioning, holding each other to account, and having a standardized way across each of the provider collaboratives. The reason the report hasn't been brought here so far is that we don't think that it was as far reaching as we originally intended. And so our respective directors of strategy, that's SLAM, Oxleas, and Southwestern and Georges, are working with partners to internal partners, that is, to see if we can get the not so much the answers we're looking for, but whether we can broaden the scope, and then we can have that discussion. And I do promise we'll bring it to an appropriate meeting, perhaps the board, to discuss in some detail.
Thanks, Iffy. Just going back to that point about the content of the meetings. When we started this, we had LGT, Bromley, Bexley Care, SLP. I'm just wondering, and picking up Sophie's point, you don't want to repeat work that's done somewhere else, but equally having an overview of the partnerships. Something about third sector partnerships as well.
Yeah, I think so. We used to have a partnership committee that every other month used to meet as part of the committee in common for the SLP. I don't think it worked well. I think it was you would sort of dip into arrangements. It was difficult to decide the reach of the committee. I think it's a good point, and of course, partnership is so much more. If I went back 6 years, the way we work now is an awful lot about partnerships. So I think what would be good is, and I'm always suggesting things for away days, but some sort of stock take of what do we consider our key partnerships, which are the committees that primarily have a sort of an assurance function over those partnerships, or how does it feed into the organisation, and maybe have that sort of view to begin with, to see what we think, because we talked about LPP last time, didn't we, which kind of just comes up through the service directorate, but maybe those type of partnerships we do need some sort of dip into by a governance committee periodically. Other ones I think are pretty well covered by normal governance arrangements.
So the suggestion there could be then at some future away day, then we at least have a scoping of what have we got, what partnerships have we got, because I bet you'd be surprised how many we've got. And then what are the arrangements, governance arrangements for it, and what are the funding arrangements, particularly where we might help that third sector, which is sometimes an irritation to our third sector partners who want to understand their annual budgeting earlier in the year than perhaps we've managed to. And of course, there's the South London Special League football, which I know we're all great champions of, that I'd like to see incorporated in that as well. And anyone has a chance to go along to that, another super event to go and see, where we have Oxleas teams competing in that particular football league, and it is a great event. So I'd certainly recommend people to go along to that. Okay, thanks very much. Back to you, Joe, on business, please.
Thank you very much. So briefly, so in general, our finances as a trust are on track for the end of this year. As usual, Steve and I, it's a bit of a white knuckle ride, really. We're always behind on the capital programme. We are always encouraging people, Rachel and Alison, to spend that capital programme. And we're assured that we are going to spend every penny by the end of the financial year. When I see the papers for business committee this month, we would like to not see a huge gap, because that's an awful lot of spend to go in the last 2 days. Clearly, there's a more external context on the financial arrangements. I think we're going to pick those up in part 2 in terms of the ICS and the beginnings of what next year looks like. We've got an alert item in here about the financials for the South West England's prisons contract. I think we are increasingly concerned about this. We will review at business committee this month, but I think unless there's meaningful movement, I think it's likely we would want to accelerate that risk to the BAF with appropriate wording. Other things I'd like to draw out. We had a post-implementation review of eMeds. I have to say, we thought it was a cracking project. And I know when I've done visits, staff were really enthusiastic. And for staff to be enthusiastic about IT projects, it takes something. So well done to everyone involved in that. Going back to what you said earlier in the meeting, Andy, we are spending more time looking at productivity. We had a bit of an interim update on our productivity metrics. Last month, we'll see more in March. We are working with SLAM on that. And I do think, and it is proving difficult, we do need to get, as the two mental health providers in the ICS, we do need to make sure we have common metrics that are compiled in a comparable way, because clearly productivity is absolutely going to be a constant theme, and we need to get ahead of where we need to be on that. And then the final point, and if you referred to it earlier when we went through the BAF, we were the first committee to have engagement with the new Service User and Carer Shadow Committee, and they reviewed 3 of our most significant risks. Asra met with the committee twice. I met with them once. We also had committee members who came to the business committee. I think it was a really thoughtful process, very reflective, and we have, Asra and the team in particular, have updated the wording of some of those risks to pick up on that feedback. And in particular, I think there's more granularity now in the risks. And in certain places, we have made much more of a distinction between the impact on service users and the impact on carers. So, for example, when we have the risk about private beds, clearly there are certain impacts on the service user, but for the family and the carers of that individual, the impact is slightly different, like having to travel and things like that. So absolutely welcome the process. I think it's made us think more about things, and I'm sure as that goes around other committees, they will similarly benefit. That's all I was going to say.
That's a very positive. Thank you, Ezra.
So firstly, just to give you some assurance on capital, you will see that the underspend is about half in month 11 of what it was in month 10. So we are definitely beginning to progress and move that towards a balanced position. So very grateful to Rachel and Alison and their teams for making sure that that occurs. The second piece I just wanted to raise was the piece about Southwest. I think it's going to be possibly another month before we bring the detailed report. We can definitely talk about progress, and there's been a huge amount of discussion and movement in this area. I'm going to say probably less positive in terms of large amounts of recurrent funding coming through, but in terms of our response to that, there has been a large amount of activity. But I think we'll need probably another month to land that, but we can certainly give an update. I'm going to say less with probably a report for the March meeting, and we'll have the full report coming in April, if that's all right.
Might be for Andy. I mean, just coming back to your conversation on productivity earlier, do you have any indication that there are going to be productivity metrics for trust like ours that are defined nationally, or are they being is each trust perhaps with 1 or 2 partners doing it organically?
So there's been a lot of focus on that this year prior to this large element coming through. So we are already members of the London Mental Health Productivity Group, which is looking to come up with, it's looking like a suite of metrics, because we weren't able to land on the snappy 1 or 2 that acutes have got. So we're trying to build via that route, and it has representation from every ICB in London. It has representation from both the providers and 2 service users to try and get that perspective in terms of outcome and what really constitutes value. We have come up with a set of metrics. It's taking some time to actually get the data pulled to be able to see first shot of that. But because I would say probably we're the region that's furthest ahead on this. So there's a lot of work that is now coming out of that group that is being shared more nationally, and we've been asked to share it with the as well as the other ICBs nationally. So I co-chair that along with the Deputy Medical Director at South West London and St George's. So I think we'll be in a good place to understand what that looks like. Whether or not that is punchy enough, I'm going to say, for what they're going to be looking at nationally is going to be another issue. I think the other area that there also has begun to raise its head again, for those that have been steeped in mental health for a number of years, they're looking back now about bringing in some form of currency. And again, so this was really about having something similar to payment by results as some of those grouping of different services that require the same level of monetary input in order to be able to resolve. So they're reshaping that from the programme that was first initiated about 10 years ago. So again, we're trying to get involved in that, and Abby has recently, she's got onto the forefront on that particular area. So I think it's a watching space at the moment. There is much less on community physical. So I think, again, we have not got what I would say is a robust set of understandable measures across community physical that we could do for productivity. So I know that they are very urgently looking at that nationally. So we will have to try and make sure that we're on the forefront of understanding direction of travel as that comes through.
Thanks, Ezra. Thanks very much. Anything else on that? If not, thanks very much indeed on that. But now, people, please.
Thanks, Effie. So I'll do this in Nina's absence, if that's all right. So we met in January. The only one in the alert section is the one that the board is already very aware of, which is the issues that we have forensics and where there are some investigations that are on. And also, as you're all aware, we've also external consultants who are coming in to help us really look at the culture there, make sure that we can create a culture for the future. That's going really well. People are really engaging with it, and we're getting some really. We'll continue to that. Then we had the biannual safe staffing review, and this is our opportunity to look in some detail at the data about dependency, about acuity, and about the skill mix that we need. Just have a look at whether or not we've got the establishment right in our inpatient setting. We had a really good discussion on that. The page attached. Really recommend the executive summary to you all, which really helps. Question that Jane will be there ready to answer. Also, the self-review against the standards that we're expected to do for freedom to speak up is something that we went through at the committee. And I'm really glad that we've managed to do this all within the timescales that we should, and that we've managed to update the policy in the timescales that we should, because there has been significant media interest in whether or not organisations have done this, particularly because there were changes recommended after the Lucy Letby report. So there's been quite a lot of coverage of that. So luckily Oxleas has been in a good place, and we had a good discussion. And I think we are working hard on trying to make sure that it's a culture where people feel comfortable to speak up. We are trying to do as much as we possibly can, as we've already discussed, to raise the profile of the Guardian service. And I think we're getting there, but we will keep working at that one. And then finally, there's some really helpful information in there about the progress of the recruitment for the fire safety officer role, which has been really hard, but there's information in there about all of that. That's what I was going to raise. And then at the next meeting, we will have a really granular look at the staff survey results, because there is a good overall picture, but what we know is that there are pockets of the organisation where things could be much improved. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Questions for Rachel, please? Ezra.
So mine's on the biannual staffing element. So within that report, in terms of the attachment, we talk about 2 wards requiring additional investment. However, there's clear evidence, and it's happened, I would say, over 2 reviews, where we have still got a number of wards that are effectively using more staff than the tool would suggest that they should be using. So I just wanted to clarify the piece where acute and crisis will be coming back to address the issue with the 2 wards that need more staffing. That needs to be taken, I think, in the round with those that we need to look at the staffing because they're using more than what it looks like should be required. And that, I think, has been consistent over the last 2 safe staffing reviews.
Ezra, I can confirm that that work is going on at the moment. Also, they've been looking at the inter-rata reliability of scoring, and we have had assurance, particularly for Holbrook Ward, that the scoring is accurate and it's been looked at very carefully. What is also really apparent is that Holbrook has been rated using the same comparators for Scadbury and Shepherd Lees, but we all know that Holbrook is very different. And if you were to compare, say, an acute ward with a comparator and a PICU, we'd almost be comparing Holbrook as the PICU in that scenario. So I think we're doing the analysis of the census that's just happened, and it may well give us slightly different information. At the same time, Ashleen and Naidu are reviewing the headroom, because the headroom factor and the fact that we've had a number of international nurses and the time that they've needed out to do their OSCEs, for example, is affecting the staffing levels. So there may be some other variables that we have to look at quite closely.
Yeah. Sorry. No, you go.
It was only that it's just come through on the HSJ that our staff survey results are the 3rd best in England. So
I was just thinking about the safe staffing, and some of these themes come up quite every time, don't they, around Holbrook and staffing numbers, and just thinking, is there an opportunity, and where would it be discussed at your meeting, I suppose, but a bit more in depth about what does this actually tell us? What is the exec view on this report? This is a huge development from the old days, Jane, when someone would walk through the door and plonk it in front of us at a meeting. So we've now got it, in good time. But I just wonder where's the in-depth discussion and the actions that arise from this.
We'll talk about the Holbrook one. So Ian mentioned previously that we are looking at the older adult bed. So that's part of that work to do with that one. And I know that we've discussed the other parts of safe staffing with the Acute and Crisis Directorate in their operational review. So there are places where we are discussing it, where the directorates will be able to take things forward.
Thank you, Ezra.
We also actually had a specific meeting on this set of safer staffing, which had a kind of wider group present to make sure that we did a proper executive deep dive into it. And as indicated, acute and crisis are spending quite a bit of time now looking through and checking through the validity of the measures. And just picking up that last point around international nurses, obviously that is not a consistent view. So that's the piece. It's not something that would happen every single planning round. So we just need to really unpick some of those key drivers for where they're seeing increased acuity and increased usage, and perhaps probably assess at a period of time where you have got a range of where you've got international recruits landing, recognising that we will need to double up, or there will be an increase in the amount of time that those particular individuals will need to spend away from the ward.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose I was just thinking about the role of this board in overseeing that, and what you're alerting us to, and what, if anything, we should know about for it. Anyway, so the actions on this again are further in-depth discussions, or have we had enough on this through people committee? We know what we've got. We know what the issues are. Okay. Right. So that will come up back through people and back through the board for progress on that. Well done. Thanks very much. Stephen, please.
As we just touched on acuity, and I just it would be good to get. Can we be assured that that is accurate and objective? I'm not quite sure what the process is, but it's such an important part of safe staffing. So if someone somewhere can just, and Jane's obviously going to do it, yeah, how assured can we be that the measurement is good?
We're using validated national tools, and we are only allowed to use those tools, and people who use them have to be specifically trained in them. And we've put regular training on to check and do the inter-rata comparators. We don't have everybody doing it. We have a key number of people that know how to do it properly. We have a lead safe staffing nurse, Iola, in post at the moment, and she's working hard with teams on check and challenge establishment reviews as well. And the heads of nursing are really engaged in looking at the tools. So M-Host is the one that we use for the mental health wards, and the Safer Nursing Care one is the one we use in intermediate care.
Right, thanks very much. Okay, thanks very much. Over to you, Stephen, please. Audit.
Thank you. One alert from our last meeting, which is in respect to the WhatsApp groups. In fact, I did say to Rachel that it would be a good idea if she could give a brief update on this. So I'll hand you over to Rachel.
Never remember, sorry. So you'll remember that we had, particularly in our inpatient settings, a practice that had developed over time where people were relying on using a WhatsApp group to book people onto shifts without following up in the way that they need to in terms of using Employee Online to do that. And we had one set of communication about it last summer, which did significantly improve matters in certain parts of the organisation, but it hadn't managed to move the behaviours in acute and crisis. We had a follow-up on that in November, and we are now seeing some really significant changes. So we are now in the position that the retrospective bookings, now that's how you measure whether or not this stuff is working, because you'll only need a retrospective booking if you haven't used the system in the right way in the first place. So it tells us what's going on. That has now more than halved in the last 3 months. So we are seeing very, very clear direction of travel. We will never eliminate retrospective bookings altogether because it's a very urgent some things need to happen very quickly. So I think we will expect to continue to see a downward movement, and all the data is suggesting that we're really getting to the nub of this problem. So we will continue to monitor it at People Committee.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think it was good to have that update because obviously our last meeting was in January, and it is a matter that has been brought to the board previously. Other points to notice or to report back on, first of all, on the internal audit programme, not often that we get, or any other trust gets a finding of significant assurance. I think the last one we had was financial reporting, but this one on the governance of the CYP Directorate, it was described by the internal auditors as being well-structured monitoring and reporting and appropriate oversight at board and committee level. So that is an outstanding result, sort of thing that happens once a year, and I can assure you other trusts very rarely see it even once a year. Local counter fraud, I did mention this at the development day, but again, just to repeat for everyone's information, that failure to prevent fraud is now a criminal act under the Economic Crime Act of October 2023. There have been that particular phrase hasn't been used previously. There is a legislation going back to 2010, failure to prevent bribery, but this is the first time failure to prevent fraud is enshrined in law. And again, I mentioned at development day, the fines are unlimited. So it's very, very, very important that we make sure that we discourage fraud as much as we can. But generally, we've got quite a good record in that area. Legal costs, as ever, Sue Owen provided a very comprehensive report. I think the most interesting thing to share with you, which we would have said before, offender healthcare are where most of the claims occur. Sue reported to us that, in fact, most of those are successfully defended. And of course, we are covered by the NHS scheme of the resolution scheme, which covers most of our costs. But if you look at the total claim from offender healthcare in the year to date up to January, it was 382,000. So it's quite a huge figure. The majority of that is in fact it goes on legal costs. From memory, I think it's about 78,000 or something actually goes as awards to the claimants, but the majority, as I say, is on legal costs. We end up at the end of the day. Last year, I think it cost us £804 resolution. NHS resolution covered everything else. And then finally, thanks to the People Committee, who we just heard from Rachel, for their review. They attended and we went through their risks. I continue to think that that model that we use as the committees coming to us and talk about the risk is immensely useful. I'm not aware of other trusts doing it, although I know one other trust who might well be doing it. But I think it's a good opportunity to helicopter and reflect on their risks, but also particularly risks coming over the horizon, a chance to just talk about ones that perhaps aren't very important now, but are further on, or that may be further on down the track. So that's all from me. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen? Oh yeah, really well done on that report. Really well done for everybody, but the effort and energy has gone into that. So something I think we can be very proud of on that front. Right, okay, Council of Governors report. Sorry, all right, okay, thank you. Council of Governors reports here in front of you. Anything to add at all, Sue, on that? Well done. Thank you. Any questions at all on the Council of Governors report? Any other business? So is that you?
It's you.
Right. Hang on. So I've just been presented with something. Staff survey results, our scores look to be the best in London across all types of trusts. So that's very good. Well done, everybody, on that one. Any other business? Iffy, please.
Right. Just one from me, Andy. I'm not sure if this is likely to be your last. I hope not. But I thought we ought to put on record our sincere thanks to you. I can't believe it, 8 years already. And of course, as I sat here reflecting on the way the board meetings have gone over the 8 years, it's really been change. It has been a real change, very well led, of course, by you. And even the result we've discussed today, the staff survey, if you look at how the organization has grown over the 8 years, no doubt that you will be missed, but I thought I should, on behalf certainly of the executive, and I hope I'm speaking for the board, say a massive thank you to you. I'm sure there'll be opportunities to talk some more, but I wanted us to have that on record just in case this is the last one.
That's very kind of you. Thanks ever so much. I think the timekeeping's improved anyway over time. So we're going to review the meeting. I think unanimously another very good meeting. I think around the room. But no, thank you. We'll have a chance to say all those things in future. Thank you. Forward agenda. Any matters to raise on that? No. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else from anyone else, thank you very much. We'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.